If you've ever tried to make a Japanese beef bowl at home and it didn't come out anywhere near as good as your favorite restaurant, I can almost guarantee you were paying attention to the wrong ingredient. I went through 18 different videos and about 12,000 comments on this dish, and everyone obsesses over the beef, when really most of the flavor in this bowl comes from two basic cooking techniques that almost no recipe actually uses: browning the onions and reducing the sauce. In Western cooking, we're taught that flavor from beef comes from browning it in a hot pan. And for almost everything you make, that's correct. But this is the one dish where it actually works against you, because in a real Japanese beef bowl, the beef never gets seared at all. It goes in raw and cooks in the simmering sauce. Traditionally, the onions go in raw too. Nothing in this bowl gets browned, but browning is real flavor, which raises the obvious question: how do we get that deep roasted flavor back in there? One of the best ways to do it is to brown the onions before anything else goes in the pan. I learned this working at a Japanese restaurant years ago where we did this every single time. Onions are full of complex sugars, and browning breaks those down into something way sweeter than raw onion. And all of that flavor cooks straight into the sauce. Before we cook the onions though, let's talk about the beef, because the cut you pick does make a real difference in this dish. So what are we looking for when we buy it? The same thing you'd want in a good steak: fat. You want to see marbling all the way through it, because in this dish the fat renders out and emulsifies into the sauce, and every other flavor in the bowl gets more pronounced because of it. The cut the Japanese chains actually use is fatty short plate, what they call bara. It's the beefiest option, and it releases its own collagen into the sauce, which thickens naturally. The easier cut to find is well-marbled ribeye, and it works for the opposite reason. It's so low in connective tissue that it stays tender when the cooking only lasts a couple of minutes. So where do you actually find beef sliced this thin? Most Asian grocery stores have these cuts already prepared for dishes like hot pot and shabu shabu, so the slicing has already been done for you. You'll usually find it in the meat section, and if it's not out with the fresh meat, check the frozen meats, because a lot of stores keep it there. Now, if you're not near an Asian grocery store, most regular supermarkets sell shaved beef, the kind meant for cheesesteaks, and it will absolutely work here. The one thing to know is that it's cut from a much leaner part of the cow, so you'll get less of that fat melting into the sauce, and the beef can dry out a little faster. It wouldn't be my first choice, but if that's what your store has, it will still work just fine. Alright, that's it for the beef. Now for the onion, because this is where all of that browned flavor we talked about actually comes from. So the first thing to get right is how you cut it. Half the onion from root end to the tip, then lay each half flat and slice it pole to pole in 1/4-inch pieces, following those same root to tip lines. The direction really does matter here. If you go against the grain, the pieces are more likely to fall apart in the sauce. If you slice it paper thin, it cooks down into mush. When you cut with the grain, you get pieces that soften in the sauce but hold their shape. Set a large pan over medium to medium-low heat. Add a little neutral oil and spread the onions out in a single layer. Stir them every couple of minutes and let them cook slowly. And while these cook, I'll tell you something I wondered about for years. At the Japanese restaurant where I worked, we always browned our onions for gyudon, even though most traditional recipes put them in raw. After running my own kitchen tests for this video, I can tell you the browned version is better. My best guess as to why is because onions release a lot of liquid. If you brown them first, most of that liquid cooks off now before the sauce goes in. This concentrates the flavor, and you reintroduce some of that caramelized taste we don't get because we're not browning the beef. Browning your vegetables like this isn't really traditional in Japanese home cooking, however, it does improve the dish. That might be my Western palate speaking, but I stand by it. What you're looking for is a deep, even golden brown across every piece. So more color than golden edges, but well before they turn dark and jammy like the onions in French onion soup. You want them intact because they still have to braise later. Once they look like this, you're ready to make the sauce. And there are actually two ways to do it: the traditional method and the fast food method most restaurants and home cooks in Japan actually use. But before we get to the sauce, I want to take a minute to talk about the pan these onions have been cooking in. This is ZWILLING Peak Hybrid Cookware, and for the last few minutes you've been watching it do something typical nonstick pans aren't supposed to be able to do. Every nonstick pan has the same trade-off. The coating that keeps the food from sticking is the same thing that keeps it from browning, which is why everything out of a nonstick pan comes out looking steamed. The reason this hybrid pan can brown is a raised stainless steel pattern that sits above a layer of PFAS-free ceramic coating. So the onions you've been watching were browning against bare steel the whole time. And nothing sticks to the bottom because that ceramic underneath is doing what nonstick is supposed to do. The body is tri-ply stainless, which is why it browned evenly across the whole pan. And because the cooking surface is steel, you can actually use metal in it. You don't have to baby it with silicone utensils. I did all my kitchen tests for the recipe in this pan. Zwilling has been making kitchen equipment since 1731, so they know what they're doing. It comes with a limited lifetime warranty, and if you want to take a look at it, the link's in the video description. Thank you to Zwilling for sponsoring this video. Now, back to the sauce. Alright, there are two ways to make this sauce, the traditional method and the fast food method. There's not a right or wrong way here, they just use different ingredients. And the less expensive one is the version most Japanese chain restaurants actually serve. Let's start with the traditional version. The base of it is dashi, which is the foundation of Japanese cuisine. It's used in thousands of dishes. It's only made from two things, and it's ridiculously easy to make. Kombu, which is dried kelp, and katsuobushi, which is smoked dried tuna that's been shaved into flakes. You can typically find both of these at any Asian grocery store. The kombu is in the dried food section, and it's sold as these big, dehydrated, dark green sheets. The katsuobushi is usually on the same aisle, and it's always in a puffy bag of what looks like gigantic pencil shavings. To make the dashi, cut a 4-inch by 4-inch piece of the kombu and give it a quick wipe with a damp cloth to clean it up a bit. You'll notice there's often a white powder all over the surface, and a lot of people mistake it for mold and wash it off. But that powder is actually a natural sugar the kelp produces, and it's a huge part of the flavor you're trying to extract, so don't wash it off. From there, drop the kombu into 1 liter of cold water in a small pot and turn it onto medium-low heat. Then right as you notice little bubbles start to surface, or just before it starts to simmer, pull the kombu out. And I know this sounds unusual, but the flavors we want from the kelp are released at lower temperatures. If you boil kombu, it starts leaching different compounds that can make your dashi bitter and slimy. Once the kombu is out, kill the heat and toss in about 2 cups of the katsuobushi. Let it steep for 2 minutes. Don't stir the dashi here because it can cloud your broth. Just let it sit to extract all the flavor. This probably seems like a bizarre combination, dried seaweed and smoked fish flakes, but there's a reason these two specific ingredients have been paired together for centuries. The kelp is loaded with glutamate, the exact same molecule that MSG is made of. So you've basically brewed natural MSG into your stock. If you have a relative who forwards you articles about the dangers of this stuff, tell them the ocean has been making it the whole time and let me know how that goes. The fish flakes add a completely different savory compound called inosinate. When you combine these two compounds, the savoriness multiplies to about 8 times stronger than either ingredient on its own. That's why dashi is so often used in Japanese cuisine, because it's a savoriness multiplier to any dish you add it to. Once the flakes have all sunk to the bottom, strain the broth through a fine mesh strainer, and whatever you do, don't press out the last bit of liquid. This is a very light, delicate stock, and pressing the fish flakes can make it bitter. And this is a traditional dashi. Today's recipe only uses part of what we made, so once it cools down, you can store the remainder in a covered container in the fridge for about 3 days. The sauce also calls for mirin, which is a sweet Japanese rice wine. For the traditional version, you want real mirin, called hon-mirin. And it's only made from rice, a fermentation culture called koji, and a distilled spirit. Just check the label before you buy, because most of the stuff labeled as mirin in American stores is a mirin-flavored substitute. You can tell this type if the first ingredient is glucose syrup or corn syrup. A brand like Eden Foods is the closest you can get to the real thing in the States, and it's available on Amazon and at Whole Foods. The last thing to grab for the traditional sauce is sake. Really, the only thing you need to know is to never buy anything labeled as cooking sake. This has salt in it purely so it can be sold as a seasoning instead of as alcohol, and it's generally not very good. You're much better off buying an inexpensive drinking sake, something like gekkakon, which most grocery stores carry. In case you're wondering why the sauce needs both wines, they're not doing the same thing. The mirin adds a bit of sweetness. The sake is dry and savory, and it's there to kill off any raw smell in the meat while it cooks. That's everything for the traditional version, but if all that sounded like too much work, the fast food version replaces every single one of those ingredients with something faster and less expensive. For a much quicker version of dashi, there's a replacement called Hondashi. It's little granules in a box or a jar, and you use it exactly like bouillon. You just stir a spoonful into hot water and you've got dashi in about 10 seconds. Most home cooks in nearly every restaurant in Japan that isn't fine dining uses some version of this. So it's a perfectly acceptable substitute if you don't want to make the real thing. You can find it at pretty much any grocery store in the States, and the box will look like this. Next is mirin, and this is where the fast food version gets a little counterintuitive. Remember that mirin flavored substitute I told you to avoid? The one where the first ingredient is corn syrup? For this version, that's actually what you want. It's called aji-mirin. It's a fraction of the price, and since the chains are cooking at scale with the least expensive ingredients they can get, the cheap stuff is genuinely closer to what they serve. That brings us to the strangest ingredient in the fast food version. Yoshinoya, the original Gyudon chain, doesn't use sake in their sauce at all. They use a fermented seasoning made from white wine. This comes straight from Yoshinoya's own website. The company's second president chose it on purpose. He found that white wine gave the sauce a cleaner aftertaste than sake, so you end up with something you can eat every single day without getting tired of it. If you want your beef bowls to taste like the most famous chain in Japan, swap the sake for an equal amount of dry white wine. And the cheapest box wine at the store is perfectly fine. That covers everything you'd need for both versions of the sauce. But don't start cooking anything yet, because there's one last thing we have to make before we start: the egg that goes on top. Out of the 12,000 comments I went through, almost nothing came up more than this egg. The reason we're making it before the sauce is that it cooks completely on its own, so it just sits in a pot of water while we handle everything else. There are two ways to top a beef bowl. The first is a raw egg yolk dropped straight onto the beef. The second and most popular option is the onsen egg, where the white is barely set and the yolk comes out like a warm custard. And that's the one we're making today. Either way, the job is the same. When the creamy yolk breaks into the hot bowl, it mixes with the sauce and coats everything in a richness that balances all that soy and sugar. Alright, so let's make them. And I'm doing 4 eggs here. Bring exactly 7.5 cups of water up to a boil, and as soon as it's boiling, kill the heat and stir in 1.5 cups of cold water. That drops it to the precise temperature range we need, because an egg yolk actually sets at a lower temperature than the white, so this water is hot enough to set the yolk without overcooking the white. Lower in your eggs straight from the fridge, put the lid on, and let them sit for 12 minutes. When the time is up, move them straight into cold water so they stop cooking immediately. Once they've cooled down, you can keep them right in their shells and store them in the fridge for a couple of days until you're ready to use them. Okay, that was the last piece of prep, so let's finally cook this thing. Let's start by reheating the onions we browned earlier over medium heat. And as soon as they're up to temp, we'll pour in the first 2 ingredients of the sauce: 2 tablespoons of sake and 1/4 cup of mirin. We're going to reduce these 2 down before anything else goes in. Reducing the sake and mirin by themselves does 2 things for us. It burns off most of the raw alcohol, but not all of it. A little always stays behind. While that's happening, the sugars in the mirin concentrate and start to brown. So this step is adding another layer of that deep flavor that started with the onions. Almost every recipe online just dumps everything in at once. And that's why so many homemade versions taste nothing like your favorite restaurant. Once you're no longer smelling the alcohol and the liquid has reduced by about half, you're ready for the next step. The rest of the sauce goes in all at once. 3/4 cup of dashi, 1/4 cup of regular soy sauce, 1.5 tablespoons of sugar, and a teaspoon of grated fresh ginger. Stir until the sugar dissolves and bring it up to a gentle simmer. As soon as it's simmering, add the whole pound of beef, spreading the slices out so they separate in the liquid. This is where the marbling we shopped for earlier is important, because all that fat melts and emulsifies straight into the sauce. Once they're no longer pink, we're ready for the last technique of the video. Most recipes have you put a lid on the pan at this point and just let everything braise. And that's exactly why so many homemade beef bowls come out soupy. We're doing the opposite. Leave the pan uncovered and let the sauce reduce. This concentrates all those flavors we layered in and thickens the sauce at the same time. If you notice any foam collecting on the surface, you can spoon that out. You want to reduce the liquid down by about half to the point where it's no longer watery but hasn't cooked down to nothing. It should coat the beef and onions and still leave enough sauce to soak into the rice. Give it a taste while it's cooking, and you'll know you're done when all the flavors taste balanced. When it looks good to you, kill the heat, and the only thing left to do is assemble the bowls. Start by adding some hot Japanese short grain rice to a bowl, then ladle the beef and onions right on top, and pour a little extra sauce over the whole thing. Then comes the onsen egg we made earlier. Place it right over the center and sprinkle it with a bit of shichimi togarashi. Next, add some sliced green onions and top it with a few slivers of beni shoga. This is pickled ginger you can find in the refrigerated section of most Asian grocery stores. And it's very traditional in this dish. And that's it. This is Gyudon, a restaurant-quality Japanese beef bowl made entirely in one pan. Now, very quickly before the taste test, this is one of the best meal prep dishes I know. The beef and sauce keep for days in the fridge. When you reheat them, keep the heat low so the beef stays tender, then just add fresh rice and a fresh egg and the bowl tastes like you made it today. Alright, back to the taste test. This is genuinely a perfect bowl of food, and the part I love is that we barely changed anything. Almost every ingredient here is traditional. But browning the onions and reducing the sauce took this from a decent homemade version to something I'd happily pay for at a restaurant. And if you want to see what real teriyaki looks like in Japan, because it's almost nothing like the American version, I'll show you how to make both in this video right here. Thanks for watching. See you next time.